Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing a GX470 2UZ-FE VVT-i from a 05 to 09. This is an adapted harness for use with a manual gearbox. So let's get into it. Right, so as I said, GX470 2UZ-FE VVT-i going into a for use. Right, so there you go. You can see we've basically stripped the whole thing down. We've taken out all the automatic gearbox wiring. We made some changes to this plug over here, which I'll go through as we go through the layout. But the first thing you're going to see is it's not on an engine. Now, we're going to get to that. There's a very specific reason why, and it's actually a very useful thing for you guys if you are doing one of these engines, because there are some really unique parts to this, which means I can't put it on my 3UZ VVT-i engine. It's going to be completely impossible to do so. But what we're going to do today, the first thing is we're going to go through the layout of the harness and show you where everything goes. Then we're going to come back and we're going to go through why it's not on an engine. Okay, so obviously we can't do any testing with it on an engine, unfortunately. Okay, right, so starting over here at the ECU side, again, nice and super simple. We've just got the 5 plugs over there, 3 for the engine harness, 2 for the body section. They come off there and make their way around there to the fuse box. Now, obviously the fuse box has got 1, 2, 3, and 4 plugs on there. They are all unique, so you can't put them in the wrong place. We're going to go through all of the wires that are coming out there because that's what the customer connects inside their vehicle. Okay, so that's that, and that comes down along there up until there. A couple of junction blocks over there, and obviously we have the other section which is coming from the engine harness going into the fuse box over there. Okay. Right, and lastly coming out of here is going to be our accelerator pedal harness, okay, with an accelerator pedal as well connected to there, okay. Right, moving along from there, the harness is going to run down there through the firewall, obviously. This didn't come with any of sort of the rubbers or grommets or anything like that, so obviously we've just taped it all up, because obviously we don't have any rubber grommets to put it on here because it never came with any of them. Not that that's a major issue. But yeah, moving along from there, this is obviously a left-hand drive vehicle, as you can see, because obviously this is going into the right side of the vehicle because it's a left-hand drive vehicle. And it's GX470 as well. So moving along there, we have our breakout that's going to come down this side of the engine over here, which is the right bank. So remember, we're always looking from the view of the driver's side. So this is the left bank, this is the right bank. The right bank has cylinder 2, 4, 6, and 8. The left bank has cylinder 1, 3, 5, and 7. Okay. So moving along from there, you'll see we have our first breakout over here, and you'll notice that these are not your standard UZ VVT-i injector plugs. So again, these are a new style injector on there, but the coil plugs are exactly the same. So this would be obviously cylinder and injector 8 over here. Moving along to over there, and then we're gonna have injector and coil for cylinder 6. Okay, so again, coils are exactly the same, injectors are different, which is another reason why we can't put it on our engine, because it's not the standard 1 or 3 UZ VVT-i injectors that you would have on our engines here. Also coming out here, which is again one of the weird things about this, and that is your mass airflow meter plug. So you'll notice that this looks nothing like what you'd normally see on a 1 or a 3 UZ VVT-i, or even on most 2 UZ VVT-is. It is for the newer style mass airflow meters that look like this. Look way more like a cartridge on there. I've got that off my IS250. So it's the only newer style MAF that I have inside the workshop here. All right, and again, this is going off to a vacuum solenoid valve, which again is going to be on the intake over there. Then moving along to there, we then have our noise suppressors. Now, what you'll notice about this noise suppressor, which is weird, is that you've got two wires in there. So normally on a 1 or a 3 VVT-i with your aluminium intake, they only have one wire going to it, which would be this black with the red, which is the 12-volt supply. Now, because the intake's plastic, obviously they have to take both wires to this, which is actually a capacitor. Okay, and you'll see there is an earthing point here as well that needs to bolt on around the inlet manifold over there. Okay. Then moving along to here, we're then going to have obviously injector and coil for cylinder 4. We're then going to have our cam sensor for the intake cam on the right bank. So again, it's all very similar to a 1 and a 3 VVT-i in terms of where these things are, but there are just subtle differences here. And again, this is for a vacuum solenoid valve, which is on the intake as well. Okay. Then moving along to here, we're then going to have our coil and our injector for cylinder 2. We're also going to have our oil control valve solenoid plug. So that's that one over there. We then have our coolant temperature sensor plug. So again, this is not the black one like you'd normally find on a 1 or a 3 VVT-i. This is the gray style, which is actually more like a, I don't even think it's the same as a 1UZ non-VVT-i. It is a completely different keyway for that. So again, different coolant temperature sensor on here. Here's where we put our own temp wire in. So you see we've labeled that. Now this is actually going to come out over there. When we go through these wires, once I've gone through the layout, you'll know exactly how that makes sense. And then you'll see the other wire that we've added in, and that is for our alternator. Okay. And these run a new style alternator. So that's the square plug with 4 wires in there. Now they don't actually use the 4 wires. So if you've seen my other videos, you know what I'm talking about. The 3rd generation GX470 and the 2nd generation LS430 from 03 to 06. They use this style of alternator. This is the same. It only uses 3 of the 4 wires. So far, I've only come across the Crown Majesta from Japan that actually uses the 4th wire, and then all the wires go to the ECU basically apart from one, and that actually then is controlled by the ECU. But in this case, it's not. It's your standard alternator ignition, alternator sense, and alternator light. Okay, so that's again coming out the fuse box over there. Okay. Coming back over here, we're going to move down over here, and this is going to be your starter knock harness, so it's going to go underneath there. Obviously, I've made some changes to this particular harness to make it work, because that's not how the original one ran. But that goes underneath, and then it goes over to our starter motor, which is that one over there, and our 2 knock sensors. So you'll see that this is like a 3UZ 6-speed. It uses the wideband knock sensors, not the single wire narrow band knock sensors in this particular case. Moving along from there, then we're going to have a couple of things popping out over here. Now, there's going to be an earthing point as well as another earthing point. So we've got 2 of them over there. And then we got the lambda sensor. So this one is for the left bank. And then this one, even though it comes out here, it's actually for the right bank. It's weird, I know, but it is exactly how they operate it in this particular case. There must be something to do with the exhaust and the way that the lambda sensor is positioned to make it like so. Right, moving along from there, we then have a little plug for a vacuum solenoid valve, which again will be on the intake. And there's another one, again, vacuum solenoid valve on the intake over there. And then we'll have the coil and injector plug for cylinder 7. And then also coming out here, so just make sure you get it right. I've tried to put a bit of tape in there so you can sort of see where the differences are. But then this will be for cylinder 5, both the coil and the injector plug. Again, same scenario, the noise filter on this side has both the earth and the 12 volts going in there, and there's the little earth strap that's going to be put onto the engine over there for that. Okay, moving a little bit more forward, we're then going to have injector and coil for cylinder number 3 over here. We then have our cam sensor for the VVL, which is basically the cam sensor in the middle of the intake there, measuring the intake cam, which is a VVT-i. Moving along here, we're then going to have injector and coil for cylinder 1. So that's going to be over there. We've got another earthing point over there. So lots of earthing points in this particular engine. And then we have our oil control valve over there. Okay. Moving along from there, we're then going to have our throttle body plug. So again, these are all drive-by-wire. Now, the reason this is weird is because normally you would think the throttle plug would be over here because the throttle always has the plug on this side. In this engine, the throttle's actually turned upside down. That's why the plug is on that side, because it's got to go in here and not in the top over here like it normally does. Okay, so another weird thing with this engine. Also coming out there, and this is a really weird thing that caught me out, this is the cam sensor. Okay, now if you follow any of my other videos, you'll know that the cam sensors on the 1UZ VVT-i, the 3UZ VVT-i, 1UZ non-VVT-i, a lot of 2UZ VVT-is and 2UZ-FEs, they all have variable reluctor cam sensors. Okay, they don't have Hall effect style sensors, and I don't know why. For whatever reason, this particular engine has a 3-wire cam sensor. It's a completely different part number. It still fits on the engine, so I think you could technically just replace the cam sensor if you're going to use this harness on an engine that didn't come with this particular setup. You probably have to change the intake around to make the throttle body go upside down and get that cam sensor in there. But yeah, that's very weird. That cam sensor is a 3-wire Hall effect style cam sensor. It is not a variable reluctant 2-wire sensor. Okay. Then the harness carries on down there, and then we have our usual stuff where it's going to break out for our crank sensor over there and our oil pressure switch over there. Okay. All right. So that is the layout of the harness. So again, it's super simple. It makes a U shape as it goes around the intake, and then it goes inside the vehicle to the ECU and the fuse box that we've added on. Right, so let's get into the wiring of the fuse box now. So as you can see, there are 2 plugs that I call the customer plugs. Okay. And they are what the customer is going to connect inside their vehicle. First of all, we do have our OBD2 connector. All right. So you can communicate with this ECU via OBD2, no problems whatsoever. And if I remember correctly, this one is CAN based. So if you have one of those digital dashes that say they accept an OBD2 signal, this one will actually work because it's CAN based. It's not SIL or K-line based like the older versions. Okay. But we've got our normal 9-pin plug over here, which is very common across our range. We pretty much try and keep it standardized now. And let's go through what the wires are and what they do. So first one, pin 1 is going to be red. It's a 14 gauge wire, and that is permanent 12-volt supply. So again, I do give an explanation in there, but I'm going to go through it now with you. But basically, the reason I say permanent 12-volt supply is because the ECU uses that permanent 12-volt supply in order to store things like long-term fuel trims and, most importantly, diagnostic codes. If you connect that red one to an ignition 12-volt source, what's going to happen is every time you turn the key off, the ECU is going to completely reset. So if you're trying to diagnose, you're going to be scratching your hair out and going crazy, because every time you start the engine, the check engine light comes on, you switch the engine off, you turn the ignition on to check the diagnostics, but the ECU has been wiped, so you're never going to get a code, and it's going to drive you insane. So please make sure you do connect that to a permanent 12-volt supply. Next up is number 2, that's black and yellow, and that's going to be your start signal. Okay, so this one needs to be fed with a 12-volt supply. Okay, now in this case, it does need to be a 12-volt supply, because in actual fact, just like the Sequoia we did, if you go back and see the Sequoia version we did with the 2UZ-FE, this ECU actually takes care of the starting. So effectively, that signal that you're sending into my fuse box there actually just goes to the ECU and tells the ECU to start. ECU takes over, and then it actually kicks the starter relay over inside there. So I think it's pretty common in American cars where you just sort of turn the key like that, boom, and you let go, and then the car will crank until it starts. That's how this one works. So the starter is actually controlled via the ECU, not via you turning the key. Okay, so basically you can flick it like that, or if you're gonna fit like a push button start, well, that's perfect, because you just got to push the button once and you leave it, and the ECU will take over and start the engine up. All right, next up is number 3, which is yellow-green. That's gauge temp. So that's where this wire gets connected to, okay? So basically, if you want to fit your own gauge temperature sensor and use a different sensor inside the car, that's exactly how you're going to do it. So you can connect that to your sensor inside the engine next to the coolant temperature sensor, and then you can take the yellow with the green wire out of there and take it to your gauge. Next up is number 4, which is going to be gray, and this is, I think, a 16 gauge wire. This is the fuel pump. So this is the wire that you can take to the 12-volt side of your fuel pump. Again, the fuel pump is controlled by the ECU in this particular case. So again, it's the same thing. It won't prime. Obviously, it only runs when it picks up that the engine is cranking, or you've basically pressed the starter button or turned the key once. It'll kick the fuel pump in, and then obviously it'll keep the fuel pump running as long as it picks up engine or rotation via the crank sensor. If the engine stops rotating, the fuel pump will run for a few seconds and then turn off, which you notice on Toyotas. If you listen very, very closely, you'll notice when you turn the key off, the pump will still run for a few seconds and then switch off. That's completely normal. That's how they do it. But obviously they have a bunch of one-way valves and so on. So it's designed to keep the fuel pressure in the rail for the next time when you go and turn the key over. That's why they don't prime. They work the system in such a way that they know that they're going to have fuel pressure when it comes time to turn the key for the next time. Okay. Number 5 is yellow with a red tracer, and that's your check engine light. So again, super simple. It gives out a ground. If you're using a standard cluster from a Toyota, obviously, you can just connect it directly to your dash. That will then cause the check engine light to light up, when you turn the ignition on, and obviously if there's an error with the actual engine itself with the sensor. Number 6 is going to be yellow, and that's going to be your tach signal. So this is the rev counter signal that comes from the ECU. Again, this is not a high level signal. So if you're putting it into a vehicle that requires a signal from like a coil or something like that, what you can normally do is you can actually go into the rev counter / tachometer. And sometimes, most of the time, even the tachometer itself is not designed for a high level signal. So they actually put a resistor in there. So if you follow the signal or the trace of where the tacho signal wire is going, you might find that you come across a resistor. If that is the case, you can actually just solder in a wire to bypass the resistor, and you can feed that signal directly into it, and it will work. The only thing you got to take into account is that, like any UZ engine, this will most likely give off a 4-cylinder engine signal and not an 8-cylinder and not a 6-cylinder. So if you have a rev counter that needs a 6-cylinder or 8-cylinder, the signal will have to be altered in order to work with your rev counter. Okay. Number 7 is going to be black and red, and that's going to be your ignition 12 volts. That's going to be the ignition 12 volts that you get from the back of the key barrel, okay? If you are taking it from the back of a key barrel, please bear in mind that ignition barrels have a few settings: off, ACC or accessories, ignition, and then start. The most important thing is that basically if you connect that ignition supply to ACC, what basically happens with your ignition barrel is when you turn the key to the start position, it cuts power to accessory. Which is why you notice when you crank or start your car over, you'll notice your radio will shut down, because that's powered from accessory, not from ignition. Okay, so the car basically tries to shut everything down to get all the power into the starter. So please make sure that if you think you found the ignition wire, the easiest way to test it is to then move the key to the start position. And if that ignition wire loses its 12 volts, you found accessory. If it keeps its 12 volts when you move the key to the start position, that's actually ignition 12 volts. Okay, and that's the one you need in this particular case. Number 8 is going to be pink and blue. That's going to be your charge light, your alternator light, your battery light, however you want to call it, okay? So again, that's coming from that alternator plug over there. It is going to give a ground signal, okay? And in most cases with these modern Toyotas, that signal actually originally went to the ECU and is either communicated via CAN or multiplex to the dash. So again, the same rules applies that you do for the smaller ones from there. If you are using an older style dash that has actual bulbs in it instead of LEDs, what you want to be careful of is that the actual cluster can backfeed into the alternator and either cause the alternator to stay on the whole time, which then burns them out very quickly, or in some rare cases I've actually seen it feed back into the fuse box and actually keep the car alive even though you cut power to ignition, because obviously this has a feed to ignition 12 volts as well on the alternator, because it needs ignition 12 volts, permanent 12 volts, and obviously the light. Okay, so please make sure if you're using something with bulbs and that happens, you can either fit a diode in the wire here to stop the backflow of electricity, or what you can do is change the bulb in the dash to an LED, which does the same job, because an LED is a light emitting diode, so it only allows electricity to flow one way, which is why if you put LEDs in the wrong way, they don't light up. So again, it does the same job for you. Right, the number 9 is going to be yellow black, and that's oil pressure. Again, these just run a simple oil pressure switch. That's this one connection over there, comes straight through the harness and goes into there. Again, it's giving out a ground. Again, originally it would have actually gone to the ECU and transmitted that information via CAN into the vehicle. But in this case, obviously we bring it out here because obviously we don't know. You're not putting this engine back into another GX470. So you need that information on to take to the dash, whether it be your original dash, whether it be an LED light you fit in, etc. Okay. On the 6-pin plug, it's very simple. It's mainly the OBD2 connector, but then lastly is the white blue, which is your brake switch, okay? So again, these things use a system where they had a 4-wire brake switch. We take care of that with a relay in the fuse box. So all you've got to do is supply that wire with 12 volts when you press the brakes. So just check your brake switch that's in your vehicle. Some of them do a ground switching, some of them do a 12 volt switching. You need to do a 12 volt switching. So if your pedal doesn't actually do that, then just find the supply that goes to your brake lights, because that would be 12 volts. And then you can run that directly to that white with a blue tracer wire. Okay. Right, so that's all the wiring that the customers need to do on their side. Obviously, this is going to be a bit of a shorter video than usual, because like I said, I can't actually test this harness out. Unfortunately, there are way too many differences, and I'd have to change a gazillion things over new injectors, obviously, because these plugs are different. The cam sensor is completely different. The throttle body's turned upside down. The MAF is, again, a new style one, which I don't have, and I'd have to buy one for one harness, unfortunately. So along with all the other things, obviously it compiled up to a stage where I just could not actually get this onto an engine and test it, unfortunately. What I've done in the background is test what I can. So obviously plugged in the throttle and made sure that works with the pedal and, you know, all of that type of jazz. Basically the best that I can do in the particular circumstances. But yeah, it's a standard harness. We've just obviously adapted it. We haven't made it brand new or anything like that. So all should be gravy. We obviously checked every single wire as we go through. We've replaced any connectors that were broken, and obviously sorted everything out to make sure that it works 100%. Okay, but that's it for this harness, guys. Again, we'll see all the photos at the end like we usually do, but if you have any questions, please feel free to put them down below. If you have any queries or whatever, you can send them through to either our Facebook page or our email, info@phoenixenginemanagement.com. And again, we're back down to only being one person, so I do apologize if it takes a while to get back to you guys. But what I'll probably do is start to dedicate one day of the week where I just sit and do messages the whole day. But when you do send a message, guys, I do link you to a video that explains to you about the sort of details that we need from you. It's just to try and speed up the process, because obviously a lot of you guys are, you know, not fully aware, for example, that just in Europe and America alone, there are 4 different variations of the LS400 1UZ non-VVT-i. And they're all different. They have all different wiring, etc. So obviously we need to know all that information. But I do say in the video how to get that information as well. Okay. But hopefully it's not too disappointing to not see it starting on an engine. It was disappointing for me, but like I said, there was way too many things that compounded all together to mean that I just couldn't convert my 2UZ VVT-i engine to run this particular harness. But thanks for watching it. We'll see you again soon.